Welcome to Talking Business. I'm your host, Darcey Edwards with Edwards Realty Trust and Queen Bee Leadership Training. Talking Business is just that. We're talking business with business leaders, entrepreneurs, leaders in the community in Hillsboro, Washington County, and Oregon. This podcast is brought to you by Xpose Hope. Catch us on all the platforms: YouTube, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, all the platforms. Like us, rate us, and share us. Hi, welcome to Talking Business. This is Darcey Edwards with Edwards Realty Trust and Queen Bee Leadership Training. And today is my pleasure to introduce, if you don't know, the Mayor of Hillsboro, Mr. Steve Callaway. Welcome to Talking Business. Thank you for taking time out of your super busy schedule to spend some time with us today.
Thank you for the invitation, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk business and to talk the business of the city.
Awesome. So how did that come about that you decided, I'm going to run for mayor?
So, originally, well, honestly, Darcey, it kind of came from, just all the involvement that I had. And, when I was on city council, and even before city council, when I was involved in Hillsboro 2020 and the budget committee and planning commission, and there were folks who said, you know what, you ought to run for city council. And when Doug Johnson's seat was open because of term limits, then I thought, okay, I'll do that. And then when Jerry Willie, my predecessor, was termed out, then that was a point in my life where I could retire and devote full-time attention to a campaign and then hopefully to being mayor. And that's how things worked out. So it was kind of a progression, for me. I don't think, when I first got involved on the budget committee, when Mayor Hughes appointed me, when Tom appointed me in 2002, I think it was,
right.
I never imagined, that, almost 20 years later, I'd be sitting in the mayor's office. And it was just an opportunity to give back to the community that we lived in. Right. And then from there, things just kind of, had their own journey.
Right. And it's been a challenging run for you this last few years.
Yep.
A little thing that came up, a little pandemic-y thing.
Right.
Some mandates.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What was your first thought when you got the call of, we need to shut down businesses? How did you handle that quietly first and then publicly? Because there's that transition where you have to have
it
that
was
thought
interesting.
process.
I remember very clearly, we flew back from the National League of Conference Congressional Summit in the first week of March. And we were landing on Thursday, and the next day I was going to be driving down to Woodland, California to see my dad, who's in his 90s. And so, I drive down there every six to 8 weeks. And I got a call that the visit was canceled because of the pandemic, and they were closing his facility. And it was real interesting because that was my first personal experience with the impact of that. And then, of course, didn't get to see my dad for months and months after.
Right.
And then, and of course, that was in California. And so then we began to see, if you will, the dominoes fall or subsequent things happen. And for me, it just a very concrete moment was Governor Brown called me. And she said, what's going on in Hillsboro? What do I need to know? And because I had talked with, Intel, and because I had talked, with our school districts and some other businesses, some large employers, I knew what the impact would be, for closing down. And so, I stressed the importance of keeping, some of manufacturing open. I stressed the importance of keeping construction open. Again, construction for the most part is outside or it's somewhat distanced. And, with some of manufacturing, with biopharmaceuticals, that's all in clean rooms.
Right.
And so, where COVID was present in other parts of the world prior to coming to the United States, and there had not been any any cases within clean room employees, they knew how to keep things under control and manageable. So those were things that I was able to share, with the governor, so that's, kind of the external conversation.
Right.
Then you had the internal conversations with our city manager, Robbie Hammond, who has just done a great job throughout this pandemic. And
Right.
so really leaning, looking external as well as internal. And, when there were conversations about closing down dining, making sure, in weekly phone calls that we had through League of Oregon Cities with the governor's office or with direct communication to let them know the impact, that this was going to have. And just to really communicate both the individual stores as well as the collective impact. And sometimes, the response to those, I would say, was more favorable. Other times, it wasn't what we had hoped for or what I would have hoped for. Along with that, then come the personal needs for food, for rent, for energy assistance, rental assistance, and Darcey, the one of the things that came so apparent to me in this pandemic was it is not a time to create relationships. It's a time where your relationships that are already in place, you really strengthen those and lean into those. And so
I love that.
Yes.
Yes.
And you think about it, because if we didn't have a strong relationship as a city with community action, then we would not have had that trust relationship to be able to give them hundreds of thousands of dollars for rental assistance.
Right.
Because you just can't do that with the public dollar to an entity that you've never worked with or an entity that doesn't have a successful track record. And so, we leaned into community action. We leaned into, PGE, and when they said, that we are not going to turn off anybody's electricity during this pandemic, for a couple of reasons. Not the least of which is that now with all kids learning at home,
right.
if they were to turn off electricity, then here you might have families that are lower income, and now their kids can't learn.
Right.
And so, when we think of large corporations, and yet here was an absolute humanitarian response to that. And so we really leaned into all of our relationships, all of our partners, including, of course, the Washington County Chamber of Commerce, which was so critical with our small business grants. And we had multiple rounds of those,
yes.
and they were a great third-party partner with us, so that in terms of screening things from a business perspective,
right.
The chamber was able to do that, because that is a different perspective than we have at City Hall. So I know I've kind of gone down a bunch of rabbit holes in my answer, and there may be some good follow-up questions for you with these.
There is. There's a statement I wanted to make that I gleaned out of what you said about those relationships that you had previously created in the time of so it's important to make sure you cultivate relationships as a business when you're starting.
Yeah.
Make those connections, work those connections, because when something bad happens, you might need to use them.
Absolutely.
The beautiful thing too about Hillsboro, and then I know, and maybe you can kind of pop us in with that, is we are the economic driver for the state of Oregon, and so people forget that. A lot of times they think, oh, that's Portland. No, it is us. And so having the largest employer in your backyard to lead and to get information from is such a dynamic place.
Right.
How did you discern from what they were saying enough to be able to combine that with the small one person, I own a truck, and how am I going to get through this? And getting those needs met to those people. I know the city stepped up and has different agencies and so forth that reached out. Can you explain any of that, where the city came in and just said, you know what, we're going to work with everybody here?
Sure. So, I had originally, when things first happened, I said to Robbie, can we put out some $500 grants? I said, we're all familiar with that statistic that the majority of American households in an emergency could not come up with $500.
Right. Yes.
So I said to Robbie, can we just, prepare, some $500 checks for families or businesses? And he said, no. He said, And he said, I love your heart.
Thanks.
You know, and
Yeah.
and I understand what you're
Right.
wanting to do, but in terms of auditing, you know,
Yeah, that's
it
kind
just
of a
doesn't.
problem.
Yeah. It doesn't fit well. But he said there are some things that we can do, and that's when we started talking about, what would people do with that $500? Okay, it would be rental assistance, it would be food, it would be utilities, and again, the city city didn't turn off any water,
Right.
during the whole pandemic, and even now, I implore folks, if you're behind on utilities, whether it's with PGE or it's with the utilities, the water, contact the provider, because people will work with you.
Right.
And so, so that's when we began to look at, okay, then how do we provide food? And so, as the government was, providing a lot of funds for food, because we had produce distributors, for instance, farmers, whatnot, who couldn't sell to restaurants,
Right.
because they were closed. So there was a lot of fresh produce that was made available. And, we had city employees who couldn't do their typical regular job, so they helped deliver food. Okay?
Wow.
So if you were, didn't have the transportation or the mobility to go out, or there were other security concerns, we would come to you with a food order, and we would be in a city marked vehicle. And so you didn't have to wonder who was at your front door, because you would see that, the city of Hillsboro, car out front. And so to be able to do those kinds of things, really kind of, I would say in some ways removed, that the need for the $500 check.
Right.
Because we basically met those needs in other ways. And so, we made money available then, as I mentioned, in community action, so that, people wouldn't lose, fall behind in their rent.
Right.
And that was before eviction moratoriums, were put into place. And then, what do we do for our businesses? And this was long before the first, federal, CARES dollars came out.
Right.
So right away, then let's go ahead and put money into the hands of our business owners. And I think the first round, was $1,500 for individuals, and maybe up to $3,000. And so we did that, and man, right, just like that, the applications, were in. And I mean, when we opened, they started like at 9 o'clock, on that specific date, that we had applications, and it just showed the absolute need that existed. And so then we did a second round and a third round, and we tried in subsequent rounds to make sure that those who might not have been able to get an
Right.
application in the first time because of the type of businesses that were being supported, or because of language limitations, we really then worked to make sure that they were also included. And I think it was in the second round that our nonprofits,
Yes.
received some funding, because we were thinking of businesses, and the first round, and then we heard, okay, our nonprofits are really struggling because donations are down, yet the need for the services provided by the nonprofits has grown.
Skyrocketed.
Yes.
Yes.
And so that was one of the great things that I loved, is that as we leaned into our relationships and those businesses that we knew and the individuals that we knew, then we could take this and we could, to use a word that we all hate, right? We could pivot and make sure that those grants were going to continue to meet all the needs of either individuals, businesses, nonprofits.
Awesome. You did a phenomenal job, and I've watched throughout this, and we're going to pivot
Yeah.
to hope.
Okay.
So what do you see the future? What's happening in Hillsboro in the future that you're excited about, that you're seeing that's kind of coming out of this cloud of darkness and into the light? What are some things that the city's doing that's new and happy and
Sure.
bringing some joy?
I think just a return to normalcy,
Yeah.
is really giving us, some hope. And, certainly with the Delta variant, it is, I think, the whole first year of the pandemic was so hard.
Right.
And I will say I was inconvenienced by it, but I didn't lose a job. I didn't lose a family member, loved one.
Right.
And so I was really more inconvenienced, than I was impacted. and in recognizing that there were others who were deeply affected and deeply impacted. And so, remembering that helped me keep things in perspective. But when the Delta variant came, as I hear, honestly, Darcey, I thought that we're kind of out of the woods, and I thought that we had seen the light at the end of the tunnel, and then with more restrictions, and fortunately, of course, we have the vaccine, which is helping us get through this. But I think that for me, just the hope really comes from the relationships that we have with each other. I think of Cindy Cosenzo with Love Connection, and of what she does with our community, and the love signs that we had posted all throughout our city.
Love on a Fence.
Thank you. Love
I
on
was
a Fence.
I sponsored that.
Oh, that's right.
One of them,
yes.
and so. Yep, Cindy Cosenzo with Age Celebration.
Thank you. That's
giving her a shout out there. Yeah.
Please, thank you. And so, and what I love is that so much of the support that came wasn't from government, but maybe was, maybe with government, but it was really just people reaching out and supporting each other. And I think to me, that's where a lot of that hope comes from, is it still comes down to the relationships that we have, whether it be with our customers, whether it be with our next door neighbor business or our next door neighbor, on our street. And that to me, gives me a lot of hope. And then, and another thing, our son and daughter-in-law just had their first, and so I was like, there is nothing like a brand new life that gives you hope for the future. And so when I see, just new birth, or when I see really young adults engaged in ways that that maybe they haven't been in previous generations, that does give me hope, because I know that we have people who care, and who care about the future, who care about each other, and that's really what is going to be able to make a difference.
Right. I love that. What is one piece of advice that you give to a new business owner who's thinking, maybe I want to, in the middle of this, I want to start a new business. I want to transition. I maybe want to run for office, and do something differently. What would be one piece of advice that you would give them?
First of all, if you want to run for office, by all means do it. And I think, that when we talk about diversity on a city council or county commission or, state legislature, whatever, diversity also includes a diversity of thought.
Right.
And so, it is when I, joined council in 2011, my background was education. And I knew education well, and I could bring that perspective. But I really valued the perspective that I heard from those who owned, private, small businesses. And because their perspective was different than mine. Right. And that's a needed perspective. So I would say, if you are interested in serving or running for office, please do. But then just, be prepared to work hard in two areas, one with your business and one with council or as mayor.
Absolutely.
I think for those who are thinking about maybe changing their business or opening a different business, one of the things that I learned as I watched businesses during the pandemic is those who were as creative during the pandemic with their business or with their business delivery, or maybe if they changed what they were selling or providing or serving. I was so impressed with those who brought that creativity, that brought them into, and that courage of entrepreneurship, that brought them into opening a business in the first place.
Right.
To see folks who changed to meet a new world, if you will, and in doing so, then we're able to continue to be successful. Some of the businesses that seemed to struggle, were trying to do the same thing in the same way, and it wasn't working. Right. Because things were closed, things were restricted, or whatnot. So to see folks who all of a sudden started to do weekly fashion shows or weekly product presentations on Facebook, or to see those who, saw, little pop-up stores, or different things like that, or even, what is a new kind of merchandise, because that may have a little bit more shelf life, that's not quite as seasonal, so that it could, so that it could last a little longer on the shelves. All of those things were so well thought out, and and I think again of our food industry, where they put up the awnings and the plexiglass and the heaters, and what one of the things that was really important to me during this whole thing, Deanna with the Washington County Chamber helped organize 8 listening sessions that I had with businesses, in 8 different sectors. And one of the things that I remember, and this has been something that, 2 things. One is, one of the restaurateurs said, look, we are so monitored, and we are inspected all the time. So if anybody knows how to comply with rules and regulations when it comes to seating, when it comes to serving, and all of this, it's restaurant owners, okay? Because we could get shut down really quickly. So trust us. That was really impactful. The other thing, somebody said, what was essential at the beginning in terms of a response to the pandemic is not what's the same thing that's necessarily essential 8 months later. And I thought that, again, that was really helpful, because I was so focused on how did we respond at the beginning. Okay, keep it up, keep doing it. But then you realize I'm responding here and things have moved. I need to be responding to what's down here now. So those are 2 things. And again, great business principles, you always have to be moving, and so to those who are thinking about running for office, just think about what's essential. Why are you running? Be aware it could be different. And for those who are looking at their businesses and expanding or opening or changing, just remember to look and keep a focus on what's essential and what it'll take to be successful.
Excellent. Anything you want to highlight happening at the city? I know you brought we brought pamphlets.
Thanks, I did. The city, all of this is available online as well. Okay. And that's just hillsboro-oregon.gov.
And it will be in our show notes, so people can click right on there from our podcast.
Perfect. So, but then, we have our city views, which comes out every 2 months, and it, and there it is hard sometimes to find information about the city in local media. We don't have our local radio station anymore. The local newspaper is different than it was, when we moved here 25, 30 years ago. And so, really a lot of just great information is now included in, in city views. And again, this is all available online. People wonder, where does my money go? So you can either look at the, hundreds and hundreds of pages in the budget book, or you can look at it, the budget in brief. And so,
wonderful.
And for those of us who like graphs and
pie charts, love a good
so
pie chart.
It is so much easier than the minutia of line by line. And then our community plan, which is something that we started, Darcey, with 2020, back in the late 1990s. And internationally recognized and award-winning, and now it's 2035 because 2020 is in the rearview mirror, fortunately.
Thank goodness,
And so this is just the update of, what do people want? What do people want the city of Hillsboro to provide, to be like, and what do I want in 2035? And there's so many things that are present in our city now that came out of 2020. And again, with that, as we gather, we have the Glenavella Walters Cultural Arts Center with the performance series for the year, and another one is coming up October 9th, a couple in October, a couple in November, a couple in December. So good offerings there. And the city recently passed the home energy score requirement to some dismay, to some controversy, but it is present. And so there's great information on what it is, why the council voted for it, and what do you need to do as a home seller, and what should you be looking for as a home buyer.
Sure.
So all of that, so
Perfect.
again, it's all online. It's also available in hard copies at our libraries, at Civic Center and Senior Center, and different places around the community.
Wonderful. You've done a wonderful job pivoting us
Thank you.
through this
Yeah.
and leading and guiding the city to being the economic driver that it is, and it will continue to be. And
Good.
thank you for coming today.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for
so
taking
much.
much time to be with us.
Absolutely.
Xpose Hope believes in being part of the community, and for that reason, we like to give back to our community and our donors. We run sites on Facebook called All About Hillsboro, All About Beaverton, All About Tigard, All About Vancouver, All About Salem, and so on. We do this so that the community can be strong, and through All About Hillsboro, we actually helped save several businesses during the COVID pandemic. So, if you'd like to help us be part of the solution in the community, connect with us at www.xposehope.com/donate. That is XPOSCHOPE.com/donate. That's your donation dollars at work.
Thank you for listening to Talking Business, brought to you by Xpose Hope. We can be found on all of your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, iTunes, all of them. Also, be sure to like us, share us, and leave a comment. Who do you want to hear from? We want to know.